Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. Day 3 of Dungeons & Dragons spoiler season continues on. Not sure why exactly I did that, but I'm keeping it in. Anyways, if you haven't seen my episode on Oswald Fiddlebender, make sure you check that one out at some point. It potentially might be the best mono white commander of all time. Also, make sure you check out my episode on Zalto Fire Giant Duke, which is definitely a completely different commander than Oswald, but still very fun in its own right. And of course, make sure you check my episode out from earlier this morning on Orcus, Prince of Undeath, who is all about, well, undeath. Whatever that is. Things not being deaf. But before you check out those episodes, stick around for this one on Volo Guide to Monsters for some anti-tribal awesomeness. Now, what exactly do I mean by that? Well, let's jump into it to find out. Now, first off, I just want to say a big thank you to Eddie for the fantastic discussions around this commander, and thank you for all of your awesome ideas. And of course, I also want to say that if I make any mistakes in this episode or in any other episode, make sure you blame Eddie in the comments below because it's always Eddie's fault. Regardless, Volo Guide to Monsters is a 3/2 human wizard that costs 2 green-blue. He has, whenever you cast a creature spell that doesn't share a creature type with a creature you control or a creature card in your graveyard, copy that spell. A copy of a creature spell becomes a token. Now, like me, you might need to read through this one a couple of times just to completely understand it, so I'll pause here a second. Okay, good. Now you completely understand this card and its implications. Basically, if you cast a new type of creature that you don't have in the field or in your graveyard, you get a copy of it. So yeah, again, like the episode title says, this is an anti-tribal commander. If you've got a lot of creatures that overlap in creature type, well, you're not going to get a lot of value out of this commander. But if you've got a ton of different kinds of creatures, you're going to get an absurd amount of value of this commander. In fact, twice as much out of every single creature you cast. Now, of course, there are ways to manipulate what's in play, and you might want to consider some cards that can either get rid of certain cards in your graveyard or temporarily get rid of a creature or two that's in play, so make sure you think about that as you're building around this commander. But again, I think the main thing that you need to consider when you're actually building this deck is picking and choosing which creatures are right for it. Yeah, there might be quite a few elemental or elf creatures that are great with this commander, but you don't want to overlap too much on the exact same creature type, because if you do, you're not going to be getting a lot of value out of those creatures. So if I was building around this commander, I would work to pick and choose very few creatures that overlap at all. So actually, the less creature types your creatures have, the better. But at the same time, the more creature types that you have in the deck, the better as well. And also, I really want to thank Eddie for pointing this out specifically. Do not include humans or wizards in this deck. Volo is a human and a wizard, so yeah, unfortunately, you're not going to be doubling up on either of those creature types. But with all that said, let's talk about some creatures that I would be considering when building around this commander. First up, there really aren't too many great oozes out there, and Acidic Slime can be fantastic with Volo. Acidic Slime is a 2/2 ooze with Death Touch that says when it enters the battlefield, destroy target artifact, enchantment, or land. So yeah, getting an extra copy of this means you get that extra ETB, and yes, that's going to be pretty fantastic getting rid of 2 things instead of 1, and getting 2 Death Touchers instead of 1 as well. Creatures with specific creature types and good ETBs is definitely the first place I looked when looking for this commander. So of course, Solemn Simulacrum can be good with this commander as well. It's a 2/2 golem, and yeah, there really aren't that many golems out there. Or at least I should say there aren't too many golems that see a lot of play. Anyways, when Sad Robot enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle, and when it dies, you may draw a card. So yeah, ramp twice and eventually draw twice, yeah, sign me up for that. Next up, let's talk about a creature that definitely warrants a discussion for being this deck, even though it's got two pretty relevant creature types with Springbloom Druid. Springbloom Druid is a 1/1 Elf Druid, and again, both those creature types, especially Elf, shows up a lot on creatures in Magic. So again, you gotta be careful in not including a lot of creatures that overlap, but this one is still a fantastic one to fit in the deck if you can. Because when it enters the battlefield, you can sacrifice a land, and if you do, search your library for the 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle your library. So getting 2 of these helps you ramp even more and really fix your mana, and on top of that, it can be fantastic for landfall. And of course, there are plenty of great landfall creatures that you can double up with things like Lotus Cobra, Rampaging Balos, and Scoot Swarm. Lotus Cobra has landfall. Whenever land enters battlefield under your control, add 1 mana of any color. So again, if you want to take things in a landfall direction, which yeah, this is a deck that has green, so you can really take advantage of synergies there, this can be incredibly powerful to get out. There aren't too many snakes in Commander that see a lot of play, so yeah, you're going to be getting 2 copies of this, and then whenever any land comes into play, you get mana. 2 free mana to utilize per land. And then Rampaging Balos is a 6/6 beast with trample that has landfall. Whenever land enters battlefield under your control, you may create a 4/4 green beast creature token. Getting 2 of these can help us make a massive army in absolutely no time. I mean, just having this in play and then casting Springbloom Druid and getting copies of each of them, that's going to be 8 beasts. Or, 32 power out of nowhere. And of course, when we're talking about mass token production, let's talk about Scoot Swarm. It's a 1/1 with landfall. Whenever land enters battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 green insect creature token. And if you've got 6 or more lands, create a token that's a copy of Scoot Swarm instead. It takes a green deck absolutely no time to get to 6 or more lands, so have fun making an absurd number of copies of this. And of course, we can really utilize some big impact ETBs with things like Avenger of Zendikar, Diluvian Primordial, and Peregrine Drake. Avenger of Zendikar is a 5/5 elemental, and yeah, unfortunately, elemental is a creature type that, well, is pretty popular-ish and is on some pretty good creatures. But Avenger of Zendikar might just be the best one for this commander. It has, when it enters the battlefield, create a 0/1 green plant creature token for each land you control. And on top of that, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a +1 counter on each plant you control. So basically, you make twice as many tokens as the number of lands you control, and then every single time a land comes into play, you get 2 counters on all of them. Next up, we've got a creature type that's not as widely used with an avatar with Diluvian Primordial. It's a 5/5 that costs 5 blue, and it's got flying, and when it enters the battlefield for each opponent, you may cast up to 1 target instant or sorcery card from that player's graveyard without paying its mana cost. If a spell cast this way will be put into a graveyard this turn, exile it instead. So yeah, 2 copies of this means up to 6 free spells in total. And then finally there's Peregrine Drake, a 2/3 Drake with flying, and when it enters the battlefield, untap up to 5 lands. So most of the time when you cast this spell, you basically just get your mana back, but now when we cast it with this commander, we get another copy of it, and now we get double our mana back. And of course, if you want to, with this commander, there are plenty of ways to use and abuse this and go infinite with it. Regardless, with this commander, there's some other incredibly powerful and broken things that we can do. So first up, I've got to bring up Spark Double. Spark Double is a 0/0 illusion that costs 3 and a blue. It says you may have Spark Double enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature or planeswalker you control. Except it enters with an additional +1 counter on it if it's a creature, it enters with an additional loyalty counter on it if it's a planeswalker, and it isn't legendary if that permanent is legendary. So basically, with this, we can make a copy of our commander. And in fact, with this, we can make 2 copies of our commander. Illusion really isn't all that popular of a creature type, and chances are we're not going to have 1 in play or in our graveyard, so yeah, we get 2 copies of this. And then, of course, things can get really out of hand when we've got basically 3 total copies of our commander in play. Because then we're getting 2 additional copies on top of our regular copy that we're going to be getting of any creature we cast that triggers it. So yeah, that's pretty absurd. And actually, if you've got ways to manage your graveyard, clones themselves are just really absurd in this deck. So whether it's Clone or Mirror Image or Mercurial Pretender, they all can have a big impact on the game. Because if there are no shapeshifters in your graveyard, well then you're pretty much just always going to get the copy of whatever you clone. Let's say that you've got Avenger of Zendikar in play and you would like a copy or 2 of it. So you cast Clone, which your commander sees as a shapeshifter on the cast. It checks what's in play and in your graveyard and says, well, no shapeshifters in play, so go ahead and copy it. You get the clone and the token copy of clone, both of which are becoming Avenger of Zendikars, which then give you the ETB to make you an absurd number of plants. So then you essentially have 4 Avenger of Zendikars in play. So again, as long as you never have a shapeshifter in play and you can manage your graveyard to make sure a shapeshifter is not in there, you're good to just keep abusing clones. So as I mentioned before, graveyard management is going to be key in this deck if this is a strategy you want to use. You're going to want to include things that can get your clones either out of your graveyard and into your hand, or just exiled and away from your graveyard. Another thing you're going to want to consider for this deck, though, are cards that can make really good use out of your tokens, like Second Harvest and Parallel Evolution. Second Harvest says for each token you control, create a token that's a copy of that permanent. And Parallel Evolution says for each creature token in play, its controller puts a creature token into play that's a copy of that creature, and it's got flashback for 4 green, green, green. Basically, double up the number of creature tokens that you have, and again, that's going to double up all their ETBs, etc., etc. The amount of value that you can get from either of these is definitely game-ending. And one more thing that Eddie brought up that I thought was quite clever is a card like Kaiga the Tidestar. It's a 5/5 flying legendary creature dragon spirit that costs 5 and a blue, and it says when it dies, gain control of target creature. So thanks to our commander, we can actually take advantage of the fact that this is legendary by abusing its death trigger. When we cast it, we make a token copy of it, and then that token dies thanks to the legend rule, and we get its death trigger. So we essentially get our 5/5 flying dragon that still has its death trigger ready, and then we also just get to steal an opponent's creature. And of course, this makes for a very fun clone target. Okay, maybe I should specify, fun for us. Regardless, now it's time for us to move on to some commanders that might want Volo in their 99. Now, with Volo, it really depends upon how individual decks are built. Like I mentioned before, Volo can definitely help with landfall synergies if you've got the right kinds of creatures in the deck that don't overlap too much with creature types, but if they do overlap, not so much. So if you've got a Tatyova Benthic Druid deck that doesn't have really all that much overlap when it comes to creature types, you can really take advantage of some ETBs. Well, I should say ETBs and landfall triggers, especially in combination. And of course, Tatyova's landfall trigger might be the best of all of them. It says whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life and draw a card. Next up, another commander that might want to consider Volo, depending again on deck build, is Azuri Claw Progress. Azuri is a 3/3 elf warrior that costs 2 green blue, and it says whenever a creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under control, you get an experience counter. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, put X +1/+1 counters on another target creature you control, where X is the number of experience counters you have. So if you've got a lot of different creatures with different creature types, you can double up those creatures and get twice as many experience counters when they come into play. And the final commander that I want to bring up is Yarok the Desecrated. Yarok is a 3/5 elemental horror that costs 2 black, green, blue. It has Death Touch and Lifelink, and if a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So Yarok already doubles up ETBs. And Volo can essentially help you do the same, so you're going to be getting an absurd number of ETBs with both of them in play if you don't have a lot of creature overlap. And yeah, Yarok can definitely be built in a landfall direction as well, so have fun with that. But now it's time for me to wrap things up and give you my final thoughts on Volo Guide to Monsters. I am really happy to see yet another Simic commander that's designed in a unique way. This isn't just your plain old, hey, okay, I care about drawing cards and getting lands into play. This is something completely different and very off the wall, and I like that. An anti-tribal commander like this one can lead to some really interesting and unique builds. And I think a lot of players are really going to enjoy not only playing the deck, but also building it and tweaking it to make it into their own. So yeah, Volo Guide to Monsters, you're definitely good in my book. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.